The fence post cracked like a gunshot. Eleanor didn't flinch. She'd stopped flinching years ago, somewhere between the second mortgage and the week she'd buried Thomas with dirt still under her fingernails. Now she just stood there in the pre-dawn cold, her breath clouding white, watching the split wood dangle uselessly from rusted wire. "Hell," she muttered. The word felt small against the wind. Everything felt small out here. Words, hopes, the flickering stub of whatever kept a person upright when gravity wanted them underground. She kicked the post. It wobbled, didn't fall. That made one of them. The ranch stretched out behind her, 200 acres of Montana scrubland that had gone from inheritance to burden in less than a generation. The barn leaned east like it was trying to run away. The house needed paint, needed shingles, needed about 15 things she couldn't afford and didn't have the energy to fix. Thomas used to joke that the land had personality. Eleanor figured personality was just a nice word for mean. She pulled her jacket tighter. March mornings up here didn't care about calendars. Winter held on with teeth, and spring only showed up when it damn well felt like it. Her hands ached. The kind of ache that started in the joints and worked its way into your thoughts, reminding you that 58 wasn't old until you tried to live like you were 30. The cattle needed feeding. The water troughs needed checking. The south pasture gate had been hanging crooked for 2 weeks, and if she didn't fix it soon, she'd lose what was left of the herd to open range. Not that it mattered much. 12 head of cattle on land that used to support 60. Math like that didn't need an accountant. She turned toward the barn, boots crunching frozen mud, and that's when she saw it. Hoof prints. Fresh ones. Leading right up to the fence she'd been staring at, then veering off toward the tree line. Eleanor stopped walking. Her pulse kicked up, not panic, just the old instinct that came from living alone in a place where alone meant vulnerable. She scanned the horizon. Nothing moved except the wind through the dry grass. No riders, no trucks. Just the prints, clean and deliberate, cutting across her land like someone had business being there. She crouched down, studying the marks. Single horse. Shod, recently. The stride was even, purposeful. Not a stray. Someone had ridden through here in the last few hours, maybe while she was still inside nursing her coffee and pretending the day wouldn't be as hard as yesterday. "Goddamn kids," she said, but she didn't believe it. Kids didn't ride out here anymore. Kids didn't ride much at all, not in Ashford. The town had been shrinking since the highway bypass went in, and what was left was mostly old-timers like her, hanging on because leaving felt like admitting defeat. The young ones who stuck around worked at the gas station or the diner, saved up, and vanished to Billings or Bozeman the second they had enough for first and last month's rent. She stood, brushing dirt off her knees. Her lower back complained. She ignored it. The prints led toward the gulch, where the property line blurred into open range. Whoever it was, they'd come and gone without asking permission, and that sat wrong. This was her land, what was left of it anyway. The bank might have owned the paper, but she'd bled into this dirt for 30 years. That bought something. Eleanor walked back to the house, her mind turning over possibilities she didn't like. Drifters, maybe. Ashford got them sometimes. Men passing through, looking for work that didn't exist, sleeping rough until they moved on. But drifters didn't usually have horses. Horses meant money, or at least enough resources to keep an animal fed and shod. She climbed the porch steps. The fourth one creaked. It always creaked. Thomas had promised to fix it the week before the aneurysm dropped him in the north field. She'd found him face down in the dirt, gone before the ambulance even left town. Some promises just stayed broken. Inside, the house was cold. She'd let the fire die overnight to save wood. The stove squatted in the corner like a sullen animal, and she fed it kindling with stiff fingers, coaxing flame until heat started to push back the chill. The kitchen smelled like old coffee and the faint, stale scent of a place where one person lived and nobody visited. She poured herself a cup from yesterday's pot, reheated it on the stove, and stood at the window. The land looked different in full light, harder. The grass was brittle and colorless, the fence line a scar of crooked posts marching toward the hills. She used to see beauty out there, used to stand in this exact spot with Thomas's arm around her waist, talking about the future like it was a thing you could count on. Build the herd, fix up the barn, maybe get some chickens, plant a bigger garden. Now the future was just tomorrow, and tomorrow looked a lot like today. The coffee was bitter. She drank it anyway. Oh, By noon, Eleanor had fed the cattle, patched a leak in the barn roof with a scrap of tarp and a prayer, and discovered that the water pump was making a noise it shouldn't make. She crouched beside it, wrench in hand, listening to the grinding whine that meant expensive repairs she couldn't afford. "Come on," she muttered. "Not you too." The pump shuddered, coughed, and kept running. She'd take it. She was wiping her hands on her jeans when she heard the truck. Eleanor straightened, shading her eyes against the sun. A dusty Ford F250 was coming up the drive, moving slow, kicking up a thin trail of dirt. She didn't recognize it. Her stomach tightened. The truck stopped near the house, and a woman climbed out. Tall, angular, late 60s, with short gray hair and the kind of face that didn't bother with pleasantries. Marianne Holt, Eleanor's closest neighbor, though close meant 8 miles and a difference of opinion on most things. "Marianne?" Eleanor nodded. "Eleanor's." Marianne walked over, hands shoved in the pockets of a canvas jacket. "Saw your fence from the road. Looks like hell. Thanks for the update. I'm serious. That post near the cattle guard is about to give up entirely. You lose stock because of it. That's on you." Eleanor bit back the response she wanted to give. Marianne wasn't wrong, and they both knew it. "I'll get to it." "When? You've been saying that for months." "When I have time." Marianne's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes sharpened. "You need help, Eleanor. Real help. Not just duct tape and stubbornness." "I'm managing." "You're drowning." The words landed flat and true, and Eleanor hated them. She hated that Marianne could say it, hated that it was obvious, hated that the only defense she had was silence. Marianne sighed. "Look, I didn't come here to fight. I came to warn you." Eleanor frowned. "About what?" "There's a drifter in town. Young guy, maybe late 20s. Been hanging around the diner asking about work. Showed up a few days ago on a decent horse, no trailer, no truck. Just riding. So people are talking. Someone saw him out near your property line yesterday morning." Eleanor's jaw tightened, the hoof prints. "He say what he wanted?" "Didn't say much of anything, from what I heard. Just paid for his coffee and left." "But you know how it is? Strange man, no history, no references. Folks get nervous." "I can handle myself." "I know you can. I'm just saying, keep your doors locked. And if he shows up here, don't let him get comfortable. Men like that, they're either running from something or looking for something. Either way, it's trouble." Eleanor didn't answer. Marianne stood there a moment longer, then shook her head and walked back to her truck. "Take care of that fence," she called, climbing in. The truck rumbled down the drive, and Eleanor watched it go, her mind already circling back to the hoof prints. A young guy, late 20s, asking about work. She looked toward the tree line, where the prints had disappeared. Trouble. Maybe. Or maybe just another thing she'd have to deal with. The next morning, the fence post was fixed. Eleanor stood there, staring at it, coffee mug frozen halfway to her lips. The post she'd been meaning to replace for weeks, the one that had cracked, the one Marianne had bitched about, was standing straight and solid, new wire strung tight, the whole section reinforced with fresh-cut cedar that sure as hell hadn't been in her barn yesterday. She set the mug down on the porch railing and walked over, slow and wary, like the fence might bite. The work was clean, professional. Whoever did it knew what they were doing, tight wraps on the wire, posts sunk deep, everything level. She ran her hand along the new wood. Still had bark on it, cut recently, probably from the grove near the gulch. Her land, her trees. Someone had come onto her property in the middle of the night, cut her timber, and fixed her fence without asking. Eleanor's chest tightened, not fear exactly, something sharper. Anger maybe, or the feeling you get when a stranger walks into your house and rearranges the furniture? Helpful or not, it was a violation. She scanned the area. No tracks she could see, though the ground was hard enough that prints didn't hold well. No tools left behind. No note, just the work, quiet and anonymous, like a ghost had done it. "Hell," she muttered. She went back inside, grabbed her shotgun from the rack by the door, checked the shells, and slung it over her shoulder. If someone was playing games, they'd picked the wrong ranch. Eleanor spent the next hour walking her property line, checking the usual places someone might camp or hide. The gulch was empty. The old line shack near the north pasture was still padlocked, dust thick on the windows. Nothing. She was heading back toward the house when she saw him. A man, standing near the barn, one hand resting on the neck of a leggy sorrel horse. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there, easy and still, like he'd been waiting. Eleanor stopped. Her hand moved to the shotgun. The man didn't move, didn't speak, just watched her with the kind of calm that came from either stupidity or confidence, and Eleanor had a feeling it wasn't stupidity. He was young, late 20s, like Marianne had said. Lean build, dark hair that needed cutting, a few days of stubble on a face that was more worn than it should have been for someone his age. He wore a faded denim jacket, scuffed boots, and a hat that had seen better years. The horse beside him was well kept, coat glossy, tack clean. Not the gear of someone down on their luck. Eleanor walked closer, slow and deliberate, the shotgun a visible weight on her shoulder. "That's far enough," she said when she was 20 feet out. The man nodded, didn't move. "You got a name?" Eleanor asked. "Caleb Rourke." His voice was low, quiet. Not unfriendly, but not trying to charm her either. "And what the hell are you doing on my land, Caleb Rourke?" "Fixing your fence." Eleanor's jaw tightened. "I didn't ask you to." "Didn't figure you did." "Then why?" Caleb shifted his weight, just slightly, his hand still resting on the horse. "Saw it needed doing. Had the time." "That's not an answer." "It's the one I got." Silence stretched between them. The wind picked up, rattling the barn door. The horse flicked its ears. Eleanor studied him. There was something in his face, something tired, guarded. A man who'd learned to keep his cards close. She didn't trust it, didn't trust him. "You the one people are talking about in town?" she asked. "Probably. They say you're looking for work." "I am." "I don't have any." Caleb nodded, like he'd expected that. "All right." He started to turn, gathering the reins, and Eleanor felt something shift in her chest. Not sympathy. She didn't do sympathy anymore. But something else. Recognition, maybe. The look of someone who kept moving because stopping hurt worse. "Wait," she said. Caleb paused. Eleanor cursed herself internally, but the words came anyway. "Why'd you really fix the fence?" He looked at her, direct and steady. "Seemed like you could use the help." "I didn't ask for it. I know." "And you just did it anyway." "Yes, ma'am." Eleanor's grip tightened on the shotgun. She should tell him to leave, should make it clear he wasn't welcome. That's what Marianne would do. That's what anyone with sense would do. But the fence was fixed, and she hadn't fixed it, and that mattered. "You got a place to stay?" she asked, hating herself a little. Caleb shook his head. "Not yet. There's a line shack about a mile north. Hasn't been used in years, but it's got a roof. You're welcome to it for a few days, long as you keep to yourself and don't make me regret this." Caleb's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes eased, just a fraction. "Appreciated. Don't thank me yet. Place is a wreck. No heat, no water. You'll be lucky if the roof doesn't collapse." "I've slept in worse." Eleanor nodded. She didn't doubt it. "I'll check on you tomorrow," she said. "Make sure you're not dead or stealing my cattle." "Yes, ma'am." He swung up into the saddle with the kind of easy grace that came from a lifetime on horseback, tipped his hat, and rode off toward the north pasture without another word. Eleanor stood there, watching him go, the shotgun heavy on her shoulder. "Idiot," she muttered. She wasn't sure if she meant him or herself. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind looping over the same thoughts. The fence, the stranger, the decision she'd made without thinking it through. Marianne's warning echoed in her head. Men like that, they're either running from something or looking for something. Maybe both. Eleanor rolled onto her side, pulling the blanket up to her chin. The house was too quiet. It had been too quiet for years, but tonight it felt worse. Oppressive. Like the silence had weight. She thought about Thomas, about the way he used to fill the space with noise, humming while he shaved, boots clomping on the floor, the low rumble of his voice when he talked to the horses. She'd complained about it back then, told him he was too loud, too much. Now she'd give anything to hear it again. The wind rattled the windows. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Eleanor closed her eyes and tried not to think about the line shack, about Caleb Rourke alone in the dark, sleeping in a place that hadn't seen life in half a decade. She told herself it didn't matter, told herself he'd be gone in a few days and everything would go back to the way it was. Quiet. Empty. Hers. The next morning, Eleanor saddled her mare, a steady, aging roan named Lacey, and rode out to the line shack. She told herself she was just checking, making sure he hadn't burned the place down or decided her cattle looked easy to move. But the truth was messier than that. The truth was, she couldn't stop thinking about the fence, about the fact that someone had seen her struggling and done something about it without asking for anything in return. It had been a long time since anyone had done that. The ride took 20 minutes, cutting through the north pasture where the grass was thinner and the ground rockier. The line shack sat in a shallow draw, sheltered by a stand of cottonwoods that had gone skeletal for the winter. It was small. One room, rough timber, a stone chimney that leaned slightly to the left. Thomas had used it during roundups, back when they'd had enough cattle to justify roundups. Now it just sat there, slowly falling apart. Except it wasn't falling apart anymore. Eleanor reined Lacey to a stop, staring. The door had been rehung. The shutters, which had been dangling on broken hinges, were straight and latched. A thin line of smoke curled from the chimney, and she could see fresh-cut wood stacked neatly against the side of the shack. Caleb was outside, bent over a sawhorse, working a plane across a length of timber. He looked up when he heard the horse, set the plane down, and straightened. "Morning," he said. Eleanor didn't answer right away. She dismounted, ground-tied Lacey, and walked closer. "You've been busy," she said. Caleb glanced back at the shack. "Needed some work. I told you it was a wreck. You weren't wrong." Eleanor looked at the door, the shutters, the neat stack of firewood. "Where'd you get the lumber?" "Deadfall, mostly. There's a lot of it in the grove. Some cedar that came down in the last storm." "And the tools?" "Brought my own." She studied him. He didn't look like someone who traveled with a full carpentry kit. But then again, she didn't know what he looked like. Didn't know anything about him except that he worked hard and didn't talk much. "You planning to stay long?" she asked. Caleb wiped his hands on his jeans. "Depends." "On what?" "Whether you're asking me to leave." Eleanor considered that. She should say yes. Should tell him to pack up and move on before people started talking more than they already were. But the shack looked better than it had in years, and he'd done it in less than a day. "You said you were looking for work," she said. "I am." "I told you I don't have any." "I remember. But I've got projects, things that need fixing. If you're willing to work for room and board, no pay, just a place to sleep and 3 meals a day, I could use the help, temporarily." Caleb didn't answer right away. He looked at her, then at the shack, then back at her. "What kind of projects?" he asked. "Fence repair. Barn work. Maybe get the water pump running right. Odds and ends. Nothing glamorous." "I don't need glamorous. And it's temporary," Eleanor said, harder this time. "I'm not looking for permanent. You do the work, you move on when it's done. Understood?" "Understood," she nodded. "All right then. Come by the house around 6. I'll have dinner ready." She turned to leave, then paused. "And Caleb?" "Yes, ma'am?" "Stay out of trouble. This town's got a long memory and a short temper. You give them a reason to talk, it'll make things harder for both of us." Caleb's expression didn't change, but there was something in his eyes. Acknowledgement, maybe. Or understanding. "I'll keep that in mind," he said. Eleanor mounted Lacey and rode back toward the house, her thoughts tangled and uncertain. She'd just hired a drifter she didn't know. Let him stay on her land, invited him to her table. Marianne was going to lose her mind. And maybe, Eleanor thought, that was exactly why she'd done it. Dinner was awkward. Eleanor set 2 plates on the table, roast chicken, boiled potatoes, carrots from a can, and sat down across from Caleb. He'd shown up exactly at 6, hat in hand, boots clean, looking like a man who understood the value of punctuality. They ate in silence for the first few minutes. Eleanor wasn't much for small talk, and Caleb didn't seem inclined to fill the quiet. The only sound was the scrape of forks on plates and the hum of the refrigerator in the corner. Finally, Eleanor couldn't take it anymore. "Where are you from?" she asked. Caleb looked up. "Wyoming, originally. Long way from home. Haven't had a home in a while." "Family?" "Not anymore." The finality in his voice shut down that line of questioning. Eleanor took another bite of chicken, chewing slowly. "You always do this?" she asked. "Drift around, fix things for strangers?" Caleb set his fork down. "Not always, but I'm good with my hands, and people usually need help." Seemed like a decent way to get by. "And when you're not fixing things?" "I move on." "To where?" "Wherever makes sense." Eleanor frowned. "That's not much of a plan." "It's the one I've got." She studied him across the table. He wasn't defensive, wasn't trying to charm her, just stating facts. It reminded her of Thomas in a way. That same quiet stubbornness, the refusal to explain yourself beyond what needed saying. "You running from something?" she asked. Caleb met her eyes. "Aren't we all?" The answer caught her off guard. She didn't have a response, so she went back to her food. They finished the meal in silence. Caleb helped her clear the plates without being asked, washed them at the sink while she dried. It was strange having someone else in the house. Strange in a way that felt both wrong and oddly normal. When the dishes were done, Caleb put his hat back on. "Thank you for the meal, ma'am," he said. "Eleanor, you don't need to ma'am me." He nodded. "Eleanor, be here at 7 tomorrow. We'll start on the barn roof." "Yes, Ma." He caught himself. "Yes, Eleanor." He left, and the house fell quiet again. Eleanor stood at the sink, staring out the window at the dark, and wondered what the hell she'd just set in motion. Over the next week, Caleb became a fixture. He worked from dawn until dusk, steady and methodical, fixed the barn roof, replaced rotted boards in the stalls, reinforced the fence line along the south pasture. Eleanor worked alongside him when she could, but mostly she let him handle it. He didn't need supervision, didn't need instruction, just got it done. The change was noticeable. The ranch started to look less like a ruin and more like a place someone gave a damn about. The barn door no longer dragged when you opened it. The fence no longer sagged. The water pump stopped grinding, thanks to a part Caleb had somehow scavenged from the hardware store in town. Eleanor tried not to think too hard about what it meant, tried not to notice the way the work felt lighter when it was shared. But she did notice, and so did the town. Marianne showed up again on Thursday, unannounced, her face set in a hard line. "You hired him," she said, no preamble. Eleanor was mucking out a stall. She didn't stop. "I did." "Are you out of your mind?" "Probably." "Eleanor, I'm serious. People are talking." "People always talk." Marianne stepped closer, lowering her voice. "They're saying you've got a man living on your property. A stranger. Someone half your age." Eleanor straightened, leaning on the pitchfork. "He's staying in the line shack. He's doing work. That's it." "That's not how it looks." "I don't care how it looks." "You should. This town can mind its own damn business." Marianne's jaw tightened. "You're making a mistake." "Wouldn't be my first." They stared at each other, the air thick with unspoken things. Finally, Marianne shook her head. "Fine. But when this blows up in your face, don't say I didn't warn you." She left, and Eleanor went back to the stall, her hands shaking just slightly. She told herself it was anger, but deep down she knew it was something else. Fear. Not of Caleb, of what choosing him, choosing this, might cost her. That night, a storm rolled in. Eleanor woke to the sound of thunder, low and threatening, rattling the windows. She sat up, heart pounding, and looked outside. The sky was black, heavy with clouds, and the wind was picking up fast. She pulled on her boots and coat, grabbed a flashlight, and headed outside. The first drops of rain hit as she crossed the yard, cold and sharp. She checked the barn, door latched, animals restless but secure. Then she looked toward the north pasture, where the line shack sat in the dark. The storm was going to be bad. She could feel it. And Caleb was out there, alone, in a shack that barely held together on a good day. Eleanor cursed under her breath. She should leave him. He was a grown man. He could handle himself. But the wind was howling now, and the rain was coming down harder, and she thought about the chimney that leaned, the roof that might not hold. "God damn it," she muttered. She grabbed Lacey, saddled her fast, and rode out into the storm. The rain was brutal. It came sideways, stinging her face, soaking through her coat in seconds. Lacey fought the wind, ears pinned back, but Eleanor pushed her forward, following the path by memory more than sight. When she reached the line shack, the door was open, banging in the wind. Eleanor's stomach dropped. She dismounted, tied Lacey to a tree, and ran inside. Caleb was there, soaked and struggling to hold a tarp over a section of roof that had torn open. Rain poured through the gap, flooding the floor. "What the hell are you doing?" Eleanor shouted over the wind. "Trying to keep this place from drowning," Caleb shouted back. "Get out of here! It's not worth it! It's all I've got!" The words hit harder than they should have. Eleanor grabbed the other end of the tarp, and together they fought to secure it, nailing it down with shaking hands while the storm screamed around them. When it was finally tied, they both collapsed against the wall, breathing hard. "You're an idiot," Eleanor said. Caleb laughed, short, breathless. "So are you. You rode out here in this." Someone had to. They sat there in the dark, rain drumming on the tarp, and Eleanor realized how close they were. Close enough that she could feel the heat of him, smell the wet denim and sweat. "You can't stay here tonight," she said quietly. "Come back to the house." Caleb looked at her. "People will talk." "Let them." For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Caleb nodded, and together they rode back through the storm. The house felt different with someone else in it. Eleanor stood in the kitchen, wringing out her soaked hair over the sink while Caleb dripped onto the floor by the door. The storm hammered against the windows, relentless and furious, like it was trying to claw its way inside. Lightning flashed, throwing stark shadows across the walls. "You need dry clothes," Eleanor said, not looking at him. Her voice came out rougher than she intended. "I'll be fine." "You'll catch pneumonia standing there like that. There's some of Thomas's things in the back room. Should fit well enough." Caleb hesitated. She could feel it, the weight of the offer hanging between them. "Go on," she said. "I'm not asking." He moved past her, careful not to get too close, and disappeared down the hallway. Eleanor listened to his footsteps, the creak of the floorboards, the sound of a drawer opening. She poured herself a whiskey, cheap stuff that burned going down, and stood at the window watching the storm tear across the land. She shouldn't have brought him here. Shouldn't have ridden out into that mess. Marianne's voice was already in her head, sharp and accusing. People will talk. Hell, they were probably already talking. Someone would have seen the lights on late. Would have noticed the extra horse in the barn come morning. Small towns had a way of knowing things before they happened. Caleb came back wearing one of Thomas's old flannel shirts, rolled at the sleeves, and a pair of work pants cinched tight with a belt. The clothes hung on him slightly. Thomas had been broader through the shoulders. But they'd do. Eleanor handed him a towel without comment. He took it, dried his hair, his face, his neck. She tried not to watch, tried not to notice the way the firelight caught the line of his jaw, the hollow beneath his cheekbone. "Sit," she said, nodding toward the table. "I'll make coffee." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I'm doing it anyway." She busied herself with the percolator, measuring grounds with hands that weren't quite steady. The silence stretched out, broken only by the storm and the hiss of the stove. When the coffee was ready, she poured 2 cups and sat down across from him. Caleb wrapped his hands around the mug, staring into it like it held answers. "Thank you," he said quietly. Eleanor shrugged. "Couldn't let you drown out there." "Still, you didn't have to come." "Yeah, well, I did." They drank in silence. The coffee was too hot, too bitter, but Eleanor didn't care. It gave her something to do with her hands, something to focus on that wasn't the man sitting across from her. "Storm's not letting up," Caleb said after a while. "Never does, not this time of year. Comes in hard, stays mean." "How long usually?" "Could be all night, could be 3 days. Weather up here doesn't follow rules." Caleb nodded, his jaw working like he was chewing on words he wasn't sure he should say. "You can take the couch," Eleanor said before he could speak. "I'll get you some blankets." "Eleanor, don't argue. You're not going back out in that, and I'm not in the mood to fight about it." His mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. Yes, ma'am. She stood, gathered bedding from the hall closet, and tossed it onto the sagging couch in the front room. It wasn't much, but it was dry and warm, and that was more than the line shack could offer tonight. When she turned around, Caleb was standing in the doorway, watching her. "This is going to cause problems for you," he said. Eleanor met his eyes. "Probably." "I can leave in the morning, soon as the weather clears." "You could." "But you don't want me to." It wasn't a question. Eleanor felt something tighten in her chest. Not panic, but something close. The kind of feeling you get when you're standing at the edge of something you can't see the bottom of. "I didn't say that. You didn't have to." They stood there, the space between them charged and complicated. Eleanor didn't know what to do with it, didn't know how to name the thing that had been building since he'd first fixed her fence without asking. "Get some sleep," she said finally, her voice rough. "We'll figure out the rest in the morning." Caleb nodded. He didn't move right away, and neither did she. Then he stepped back, breaking whatever had been holding them there. "Good night, Eleanor." "Good night." She went to her room and closed the door, leaning against it in the dark. Her heart was beating too fast, her thoughts tangled and sharp. She told herself it was just the storm, just the adrenaline wearing off, just the shock of having another person in her space after so many years alone. But she knew better. She knew what this was, and it scared the hell out of her. Morning came gray and sullen. The storm had passed, leaving the land soaked and the sky bruised. Eleanor woke to the smell of coffee and something cooking, bacon, maybe. She sat up, disoriented, then remembered. Caleb. She pulled on her robe and walked into the kitchen. He was at the stove, tending a skillet, already dressed in his own clothes, dried and patched where they'd torn. He looked up when she came in. "Hope you don't mind," he said. "Figured I owed you breakfast." Eleanor blinked. "You didn't have to do that." "I know." She poured herself coffee and sat at the table, watching him work. He moved with the same quiet efficiency he brought to everything. No wasted motion, no fuss. The bacon sizzled, eggs cracked into the pan, toast browned in the oven. It had been years since someone had cooked for her. "Sleep all right?" she asked. "Better than I have in a while." "Couch is lumpy." "I've had worse." She believed him. There was something in the way he said it, matter of fact, no self-pity. He'd been on the road long enough that comfort was a luxury, not an expectation. He plated the food and set it in front of her, sat down across the table with his own. They ate without talking, but it didn't feel awkward this time. It felt easier. Like they'd crossed some invisible line in the night, and neither of them was sure what it meant, but they weren't running from it either. When they finished, Eleanor stood and cleared the plates. "I need to check on the cattle," she said. "Make sure none of them got spooked during the storm." "I'll come with you." "You don't have to." "I know, but I'm going to." Eleanor didn't argue. She grabbed her coat and hat and they headed outside together. The land was a mess. Branches down everywhere, fence posts leaning, mud thick enough to suck at their boots. They checked the herd first, 12 head, all accounted for, huddled near the far end of the pasture, looking miserable and drenched. Then they walked the fence line, marking spots that needed repair. It was hard work, the kind that made your back ache and your hands blister. But Caleb kept pace with her, didn't complain, didn't slow down. And Eleanor found herself grateful for it. Not just the help, but the company. The way he filled the silence without needing to talk. They were fixing a post near the road when the truck pulled up. Eleanor recognized it before she saw the driver. Marianne's Ford, dusty and familiar. Her stomach sank. Marianne climbed out, her face set in a look that meant business. She walked over slowly, deliberately, her eyes taking in everything. The mud on Eleanor's jeans, the way Caleb stood a little too close, the fact that they were working together like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Morning, Marianne," Eleanor said, keeping her voice even. "Eleanor." Marianne's gaze shifted to Caleb. "Mr. Rourke." Caleb nodded. "Ma'am?" "Hell of a storm last night." "It was," Eleanor said. "I came by to check on you, make sure you were all right." Marianne's tone was careful, measured. "Saw the lights on late. Got worried." Eleanor's jaw tightened. She knew what Marianne was really saying, knew what she'd really come to check on. I'm fine, Eleanor said. Line shack took some damage. Caleb came up to the house until it passed. I see. The silence that followed was heavy and loaded. Marianne's eyes moved between them, reading things Eleanor didn't want read. Can I talk to you? Marianne asked. Alone? Eleanor glanced at Caleb. He was already stepping back, giving them space. I'll finish this section, he said quietly, and walked off toward the next post. When he was out of earshot, Marianne turned on her. What are you doing, Eleanor? Fixing my fence. You know what I mean. Eleanor set down the post driver, wiping sweat from her forehead. Say what you came to say, Marianne. He stayed the night. The storm was bad. I wasn't going to let him freeze to death in a shack with a leaking roof. So you brought him into your house. I gave him the couch. Do you hear yourself? Marianne's voice rose slightly. It doesn't matter where he slept. What matters is how it looks. I don't care how it looks. Then you're a fool. Marianne stepped closer, lowering her voice. People are already talking. You think they're going to believe nothing happened? A man his age spending the night with a woman your age? Nothing did happen. I know that, but they don't, and they won't. Marianne's expression softened just slightly. Eleanor, I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm trying to protect you. This town, these people, they don't forgive. You give them a reason to judge you, they will. And once they do, there's no coming back from it. Eleanor looked out at the land, at Caleb working the fence line in the distance. She thought about the barn roof that no longer leaked, the water pump that ran smooth, the way the work felt lighter when it was shared. Maybe I don't want to come back, she said quietly. Marianne stared at her. What's that supposed to mean? It means I'm tired, Marianne, tired of doing everything alone, tired of this place falling apart around me, tired of pretending I'm fine when I'm not. She turned to face her. He helps, that's all. He works hard, he doesn't ask for much, and for the first time in years, I don't feel like I'm drowning. And when he leaves, what then? Eleanor didn't have an answer for that. The question sat between them, sharp and unyielding. He will leave, Marianne said, gentler now. Men like that always do, and you'll be the one left dealing with the fallout. Maybe, but that's my choice to make. Marianne shook her head slowly. You're going to regret this. Probably. They stood there in the cold morning air, two women who'd known each other for decades, divided by something neither of them could name. Finally, Marianne turned and walked back to her truck. She paused at the door, looking back. When it falls apart, she said, don't say I didn't warn you. The truck rumbled down the drive, kicking up mud, and Eleanor stood there watching it go. Caleb walked back over, hammer in hand. Everything all right? No, Eleanor said. But it will be. She picked up the post driver and got back to work. The next few days passed in a kind of strange, fragile peace. Caleb stayed in the line shack. Eleanor had insisted on that much, at least. But he took his meals at the house. They worked side by side, fixing what could be fixed, letting go of what couldn't. The rhythm of it became almost comfortable, almost normal. But the town didn't forget. Eleanor felt it the next time she went into Ashford for supplies. The way conversations stopped when she walked into the general store. The sideways glances, the whispers that weren't quite quiet enough. She grabbed what she needed, flour, salt, a bag of grain, and carried it to the counter. The clerk, a thin woman named Patty, with sharp eyes and sharper opinions, rang her up in silence. That'll be $43.50, Patty said, not meeting her eyes. Eleanor paid. As she gathered her bags, Patty leaned in slightly. Heard you've got a hired hand out at your place. Eleanor's hand tightened on the bag. That's right. A young fellow, from what I hear. He works hard. Patty's mouth pressed into a thin line. I'm sure he does. The implication hung there, ugly and undeniable. Eleanor felt heat rise in her face, not embarrassment, but anger. You got something to say, Patty? Patty straightened, her expression going carefully neutral. Just making conversation. No, you're not. Eleanor set the bags down on the counter, leaning forward. You're fishing, so let me save you the trouble. Yes, I hired someone. Yes, he's younger than me. No, it's none of your damn business. Patty's face flushed. I didn't mean… Yes, you did. Eleanor picked up her bags. And you can tell whoever's asking that if they want to know something, they can come ask me themselves instead of sending you to do it. She walked out before Patty could respond, her pulse pounding in her ears. By the time she got back to the ranch, her hands were shaking. She unloaded the truck in jerky, angry movements, slamming the tailgate harder than necessary. Caleb came around the side of the barn, saw her face, and stopped. What happened? Nothing. Eleanor? I said nothing. She hauled a bag of grain over her shoulder, staggering slightly under the weight. Caleb moved to help her. She shook him off. I can do it myself. I know you can, but you don't have to. Yes, I do. The words came out harsher than she meant. She set the bag down, breathing hard. Because the second I stop, the second I let someone else carry this, people think they know what it means. They think they know what I am. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, What do they think you are? Desperate, lonely, pathetic. She laughed bitterly. Take your pick. And what do you think you are? The question caught her off guard. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw no judgment there, just curiosity, just the quiet kind of attention that felt like being seen. I don't know anymore, she admitted. Caleb nodded slowly. For what it's worth, I think you're stubborn as hell, and stronger than you give yourself credit for. Eleanor's throat tightened. She didn't know what to say to that, didn't know how to respond to kindness that didn't want anything in return. Help me with the grain, she said finally. Together, they carried it into the barn. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep again. She sat at the kitchen table, nursing a whiskey, staring at nothing. The house was too quiet. Her thoughts were too loud. She kept thinking about Patty's face, about the whispers, about Marianne's warning, about the way the whole town seemed to be watching, waiting for her to fail. A knock at the door startled her. She got up, opened it. Caleb stood on the porch, his hat in his hands. Saw your light on, he said. Figured you were up. Eleanor stepped aside. He came in, closed the door behind him. She poured him a whiskey without asking, and they sat at the table in the dim light. Can't sleep? Caleb asked. Never could, after Thomas died. Brain won't shut off. I get that. They drank in silence. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. You ever regret it? Eleanor asked. The way you live, no place to call home, no people. Caleb considered the question. Sometimes. But regret doesn't change anything. You just keep moving. That's a lonely way to live. Lonely's safer. Eleanor turned that over in her mind. She understood it. Understood the logic of it. Keep moving, don't get attached, don't give anyone the chance to hurt you. You know what's funny? She said. I thought I was doing that. Keeping people out, staying safe. But all I did was trap myself, built a cage and called it survival. Caleb looked at her. So why'd you let me in? I didn't plan to. But you did. Yeah. She met his eyes. I did. The air between them shifted. Something unspoken passed in the silence, an acknowledgement of the thing they'd both been dancing around. The reason the town was talking, the reason Marianne was worried, the reason Eleanor's heart kicked up every time he walked into a room. I should go, Caleb said, but he didn't move. You should, Eleanor agreed, but she didn't want him to. He stood. She stood. They were close now, close enough that she could see the scar above his left eyebrow, the faint stubble on his jaw, the way his chest rose and fell with each breath. Eleanor, he said quietly, if I stay, if this keeps going, it's going to get worse. The talk, the judgment, all of it. I know. And you're still willing to risk it? She thought about Marianne's warning, about Patty's thin smile, about the years she'd spent alone, doing everything right, following all the rules, and still ending up empty. I'm tired of being afraid, she said. Caleb's hand came up, hesitated, then touched her face, just barely, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. The gentleness of it nearly broke her. I don't want to hurt you, he said. Then don't. He leaned in. She met him halfway. The kiss was slow, careful, like they were both waiting for the other to pull back. But neither did. When they finally broke apart, Eleanor's heart was racing. Caleb rested his forehead against hers, his breath warm on her skin. "This changes things," he said. "I know. People are going to come after you." "Let them." He pulled back just enough to look at her. "You sure about this?" Eleanor thought about all the things she'd lost, all the things she'd given up, all the years she'd spent trying to be small enough, quiet enough, acceptable enough. "No," she said honestly, "but I'm doing it anyway." Caleb smiled, a real one this time, small and crooked and entirely his. "All right then." He kissed her again, and this time Eleanor didn't think about the town or Marianne or what came next. She just let herself feel it, the warmth of another person, the weight of a hand on her waist, the fragile, terrifying possibility that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to carry everything alone. When he left that night, the house didn't feel as empty, and Eleanor, for the first time in years, didn't feel afraid. The storm that had been building finally broke 3 days later. Eleanor was in the barn when she heard the truck. Multiple trucks, actually. She walked outside and her stomach dropped. 4 pickups parked in her drive. Men climbing out, ranchers she knew, faces set and serious. At the front was Dale Pritchard, a thick-shouldered man in his 60s who owned the spread to the west. He'd been friends with Thomas once. Now he looked at Eleanor like she was something he'd stepped in. "Eleanor," Dale said, his voice flat. "Dale, what's this about? I think you know." She glanced at the other men, Jim Holloway, Pete Alvarez, Sam Keene, all of them tight-lipped, all of them armed with the kind of righteous certainty that made men dangerous. "Say what you came to say," Eleanor said. Dale stepped forward. "We want him gone." "Excuse me?" "The drifter, Rourke. We want him off your property and out of this town." Eleanor's hands curled into fists. "That's not your decision to make." "It is when it affects all of us," Pete said. "We got families here, kids. We don't need some stranger hanging around, taking advantage." "Taking advantage of what?" Dale's jaw worked. "Of you, Eleanor. For Christ's sake, can't you see it? He's using you." "Using me for what?" "I'm not paying him. I'm barely feeding him." "That's not what we're talking about," Jim said quietly. "You know it isn't." Eleanor felt her face heat. "Then say it plain." Dale looked uncomfortable. "You're making a fool of yourself. A man his age, a woman yours. It's not right. People see it. People talk." "Let them talk." "It's not just talk," Sam said. "It's reputation. And when your reputation goes, so does ours. We're all trying to keep this community together, keep things respectable. You pull a stunt like this, it reflects on all of us." Eleanor stared at them. Men she'd known for years. Men who'd come to Thomas's funeral, who'd offered condolences and empty promises of help. Now they stood in her yard like a jury delivering a verdict. "Get off my land," she said quietly. Dale didn't move. "We're not leaving until—" "I said get off my land." Her voice was steel now. "This is my property, my life. And who I let stay here is my business, not yours, not the town's, mine. Eleanor, be reasonable." "Reasonable?" She laughed, sharp and bitter. "You want reasonable. How about this? I've been alone for 4 years. 4 years of doing everything myself while you all drove past my place and pretended not to see it falling apart. Not one of you offered to help, not one. But now that I've got someone who actually gives a damn, suddenly you all care?" "That's not fair," Pete said. "Fair?" Eleanor's voice rose. "Fair is you minding your own damn business. Fair is respecting that I'm a grown woman who can make her own choices. Fair is not standing in my yard and demanding I throw out the only person who's helped me in years." The men shifted uncomfortably. Dale's face was red, his mouth pressed into a hard line. "We're trying to help you," he said. "No, you're trying to control me." "There's a difference." Behind them, another truck pulled up. Eleanor's heart sank. "Marianne." She climbed out slowly, taking in the scene, walked over and stood beside Dale, her expression unreadable. "You too?" Eleanor asked. Marianne didn't answer right away. She looked at Eleanor, then at the men, then back at Eleanor. "I told you this would happen," Marianne said quietly, "and I told you I didn't care." "Well, maybe you should." Marianne's voice was tired. "Because this, all of this, it's not going to end well. You know it won't." Eleanor felt something crack inside her. Not break, but splinter. The weight of it all, the judgment, the pressure, the assumption that she couldn't possibly know her own mind, it was too much. "He's staying," she said, "and if you don't like it, you know where the road is." Dale took a step forward. "Eleanor!" The barn door opened. Caleb walked out, slow and deliberate. He must have heard the whole thing. His eyes swept over the trucks, the men, the tension thick enough to choke on. "There a problem here?" he asked, his voice calm. "This doesn't concern you," Dale said. "Sounds like it does." "We're talking to Eleanor, and I'm standing right here." Caleb moved closer, positioning himself slightly in front of Eleanor. Not blocking her, but present. "So if you've got something to say, say it." Dale's face darkened. "You've got a lot of nerve." "I've got exactly as much nerve as the situation calls for." Caleb's tone didn't rise, didn't waver. "Now, are we going to have a conversation, or are you going to keep treating Eleanor like she's not capable of making her own decisions?" The men bristled. Jim took a step forward, and for a second Eleanor thought it was going to get ugly. Then Marianne raised a hand. "Enough," she said, "all of you. This isn't helping." She looked at Eleanor, and there was something in her eyes. Disappointment, maybe. Or sadness. "I hope you know what you're doing," Marianne said. "So do I," Eleanor replied. Marianne shook her head and walked back to her truck. One by one, the men followed, reluctant, angry, but leaving. Dale was the last. "This isn't over," he said. "Yes," Eleanor said. "It is." The trucks pulled away, leaving her and Caleb standing in the drive. The silence felt heavier than the confrontation. "You all right?" Caleb asked. Eleanor's hands were shaking. She clasped them together hard. "No." "You want me to go? Make this easier?" She turned to face him. "Is that what you want?" "I want you to be safe, happy, whatever that looks like." "Then stay." Caleb searched her face. "You sure?" "I'm not sure of anything anymore," Eleanor said. "But I know I don't want to go back to the way things were, alone, afraid, half alive." She reached for his hand. "So yes, stay." He squeezed her hand gently, and in that moment, standing in the wreckage of her reputation with the town turned against her, Eleanor felt something she hadn't felt in years. Free. The fallout came fast. Within 2 days, Eleanor noticed the changes. The feed store suddenly didn't have the grain she needed. Had to special order it, they said. Might take a week. The mechanic who'd always fixed her truck on short notice was suddenly booked solid. When she stopped by the diner for coffee, the usual booth in the back was occupied, and nobody moved to make room. She sat at the counter instead. The waitress, a middle-aged woman named Donna who'd served her coffee for 15 years, barely made eye contact. "Just coffee," Eleanor said. Donna poured it in silence, set it down harder than necessary, and walked away without her usual small talk about the weather or whose grandson was getting married. Eleanor wrapped her hands around the mug and stared into the dark liquid. Around her, conversations continued in low murmurs. Nobody looked directly at her, but she felt the weight of their attention like a physical thing. She lasted 10 minutes before she left money on the counter and walked out. The drive back to the ranch felt longer than usual. The land stretched out around her, familiar and indifferent, and Eleanor wondered, not for the first time, if she'd made a terrible mistake. Not about Caleb, about thinking she could do this and still have a place in the world she'd known her whole life. When she pulled up to the house, Caleb was on the porch, mending a bridle. He looked up, read something in her face, and set the leather aside. "How'd it go?" he asked. "About like you'd expect." He didn't say anything, just waited. Eleanor climbed the steps and sat down beside him, suddenly exhausted. "They're freezing me out, the whole damn town." "I'm sorry. Not your fault." isn't it? She looked at him. You didn't make me bring you up to the house that night. Didn't make me tell them to go to hell. That was all me. Caleb's jaw tightened. Still, if I left, don't. Eleanor's voice came out sharper than she meant. Don't do that. Don't make this about you being noble or whatever the hell you think you need to be. I made a choice. I'm living with it. Are you, though? Living with it? He gestured toward the road. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like they're making you pay for it. So what? You think I should crawl back, apologize, tell them they were right? Eleanor stood, her frustration boiling over. I spent 30 years doing what everyone expected, being the good wife, the respectable widow, keeping my head down and my mouth shut. And you know what it got me? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. That's not true. Isn't it? She laughed bitterly. Thomas died and left me with a mountain of debt and a failing ranch. My so-called friends disappeared the second things got hard. The town I'd lived in my whole life treated me like furniture. There, but not worth noticing. So yeah, maybe I'm paying for my choices now. But at least they're my choices. Caleb stood, closing the distance between them. I know. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying I hate watching you hurt because of me. It's not because of you, it's because of them. Their rules, their judgment, their need to control everything. Eleanor's voice cracked slightly. I'm tired, Caleb. Tired of shrinking myself to fit into boxes other people built. He reached for her hand. She let him take it. Then don't, he said quietly. Don't shrink. Don't apologize. Just be. Eleanor wanted to believe it was that simple, wanted to think she could just exist without consequence. But the world didn't work that way. Not for women her age, not in towns like this. Still, standing there with his hand in hers, she could almost pretend. That night, Eleanor lay awake staring at the ceiling. Sleep felt impossible. Her mind kept circling back to the diner, to Donna's cold silence, to the way the whole town had decided she was the problem. Around midnight, she gave up, pulled on her robe and padded into the kitchen, poured herself whiskey she probably didn't need and stood at the window looking out at the dark. She heard the footsteps before she saw him. Caleb appeared in the doorway, wearing the same flannel pants he'd borrowed weeks ago, his hair mussed from sleep. Couldn't sleep either? She asked. Heard you moving around. She poured him a glass without asking. They stood side by side at the counter, drinking in silence. You know what the worst part is? Eleanor said after a while. I keep waiting to regret it. Keep thinking I'll wake up one morning and realize I've ruined everything for nothing. But I don't. Caleb turned to look at her. What do you feel instead? Angry, sad, scared. She paused. Alive. The word hung between them. I haven't felt alive in so long, Eleanor continued. After Thomas died, I just shut down. Went through the motions. Work, sleep, survive, repeat. I told myself that was enough, that wanting more was selfish. It's not selfish. No? She met his eyes. Then why does it feel like I'm being punished for it? Caleb set his glass down. Because people are afraid of anything that doesn't fit their idea of how the world should work. You're not following the script. That scares them. What script? The one where women your age are supposed to fade quietly into the background. Be grateful for what they had, not ask for more. He stepped closer. You're not doing that, and it makes them uncomfortable. Eleanor absorbed that. It made a brutal kind of sense. What about you, Meg? She asked. What script are you running from? Caleb's expression shifted, closed off slightly, the way it did when she got too close to something he didn't want to talk about. That's different, he said. Is it? Eleanor. No, I'm serious. You drift from place to place, never staying anywhere long enough to matter. Never letting anyone close enough to know you. That's a script too. Just a different one. Caleb looked away. Maybe. So what are you afraid of? He was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. Failing people. Letting them down. Being the reason things fall apart. That happened before? Yeah. He didn't elaborate. Eleanor wanted to push, wanted to know more, but she understood the need for walls. She'd built enough of her own. "For what it's worth," she said, "you haven't let me down." Caleb looked at her, something shifting in his expression. "Yet." "Stop that. Stop assuming you're going to screw this up. Someone has to." "Why? Why does anyone have to screw anything up? Why can't we just see what happens?" "Because things don't work that way. Not for people like us." Eleanor felt a flash of irritation. "And who decided that? Who wrote the rule that says broken people can't build something good?" "Life. Experience. Every time I've tried—" He stopped himself. "Every time you've tried what?" Caleb shook his head. "Doesn't matter." "It does to me." He looked at her for a long moment, then sighed. "Every time I've tried to stay somewhere, build something, it falls apart, and I'm always the common denominator. Or maybe you just haven't found the right place yet. And you think this is it? This ranch? This town that hates you because of me? I think it's worth finding out." Caleb's jaw worked. She could see the war happening inside him, the part that wanted to believe her fighting with the part that had been disappointed too many times. "I don't want to hurt you, sir," he said finally. "You've said that before." "Because it's true." Eleanor stepped closer, closing the space between them. "Then don't. Don't run because you're scared. Don't leave because you think that's what you're supposed to do. Just stay. Fight for this. For us." "What if it's not enough?" "What if it is?" She kissed him then, and for a moment everything else fell away. The town, the judgment, the fear. It was just them, two people trying to figure out how to be more than their scars. When they broke apart, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "Neither do I, but I'm willing to learn if you are." He pulled back just enough to look at her. Something in his expression had softened. Not surrender exactly, but something close to it. "All right," he said. "All right." The next morning brought a visitor Eleanor hadn't expected. She was in the barn mucking stalls when she heard the car. Not a truck this time. A sedan. Clean, newer than anything most folks in Ashford drove. She walked outside, wiping her hands on her jeans. A woman climbed out, tall, early 40s, dressed in dark slacks and a blazer that looked out of place against the rough backdrop of the ranch. She had the kind of professional polish that came from a city, probably Billings or Great Falls. "Eleanor Vance?" the woman asked. "That's me." The woman extended a hand. "My name is Angela Porter. I'm with First Montana Bank." Eleanor's stomach dropped. She shook the offered hand on autopilot, her mind already racing. The bank, the mortgage, the payments she'd been scraping together month by month. "What can I do for you?" Eleanor asked, keeping her voice steady. Angela pulled a folder from her car. "Is there somewhere we can talk?" They ended up at the kitchen table. Eleanor made coffee she didn't want and sat down across from the banker, her hands clasped tight to keep them from shaking. Angela opened the folder, laying out papers with the kind of practiced efficiency that meant she'd done this before. Many times. "Mrs. Vance, I'm here to discuss your mortgage situation." "I've been making my payments." "You have, but you're 3 months behind, and according to our records, you've restructured twice in the past 4 years. Eleanor's jaw tightened. "I'm aware. The bank has been patient, but we have policies, timelines, and frankly, the property isn't generating the kind of revenue that suggests you'll be able to catch up. I'm working on it." Angela's expression was professionally sympathetic, the kind that didn't actually mean anything. "I'm sure you are, but the reality is you're operating at a loss. The ranch isn't sustainable in its current state." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying the bank is prepared to offer you an option." Angela slid a document across the table. "We can facilitate a sale. There's a development company interested in purchasing properties in this area. They're offering fair market value, and you'd be released from the mortgage debt entirely." Eleanor stared at the paper like it was a snake. "You want me to sell?" "We're suggesting it might be your best option. You'd walk away with enough to start over somewhere else. No debt, no burden." "This ranch isn't a burden. It's my home." I understand this is difficult, but from a financial perspective, I don't care about the financial perspective. Eleanor's voice rose. My husband built this place. His father before him. I'm not just going to hand it over to some development company so they can tear it down and build condos. Angela's expression didn't change. Mrs. Vance, I'm trying to help you. If you continue on this path, the bank will have no choice but to foreclose. At least this way, you have some control over the outcome. Control? You call forcing me to sell control? No one is forcing anything, but you need to be realistic about your situation. Eleanor stood, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. Get out. Angela blinked. Excuse me? I said get out. Take your papers and your offers and get off my property. Mrs. Vance, if you would just… Now. Angela gathered her documents slowly, her professional mask slipping slightly. You have until the end of the month to bring your payments current. After that, the bank will begin foreclosure proceedings. I strongly suggest you reconsider our offer. She left, and Eleanor stood at the window watching the sedan disappear down the drive. Her hands were shaking again. Not from anger this time, from fear. She'd known things were bad, but hearing it stated so plainly, the timeline, the consequences, the inevitability of it all, made it real in a way it hadn't been before. She was going to lose the ranch, unless she found a miracle in the next 3 weeks. Eleanor didn't tell Caleb right away. She spent the rest of the day working herself to exhaustion, trying not to think about it, but by evening, the weight of it was crushing her. They were sitting on the porch after dinner when she finally spoke. Bank came by today. Caleb looked up from the piece of wood he'd been whittling. Yeah? What'd they want? To tell me I'm running out of time. 3 weeks to catch up on payments or they foreclose. His hands stilled. How much do you owe? $8,000, plus whatever interest they tack on. Caleb set the wood aside. That's a lot. Yeah. You got it? Eleanor laughed, short and hollow. If I had $8,000, I wouldn't be 3 months behind. They sat in silence. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. It would have been beautiful if Eleanor could have seen past the panic. What are you going to do? Caleb asked. I don't know. Sell, I guess. That's what the banker wants. Got some company ready to swoop in and turn this place into whatever makes them the most money. And you don't want that. Of course I don't want that. Eleanor's voice cracked. But what choice do I have? I can't make $8,000 appear out of thin air. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, What if you could? She turned to look at him. What? What if there was a way to make the money? Would you fight to keep this place? Of course. But there isn't a way. I've got 12 head of cattle worth maybe $3,000 if I'm lucky. The equipment's ancient and half broken. I've got nothing to sell that's worth anything. You've got land. I'm not selling the land. No. But you could lease it. Grazing rights, maybe. I've seen it work on other ranches. Eleanor shook her head. Nobody's going to pay premium rates for pasture this rough. Maybe not premium, but something's better than nothing. She wanted to argue, wanted to list all the reasons it wouldn't work. But a small part of her, the part that wasn't drowning in despair, grabbed onto the idea like a lifeline. Even if someone wanted to lease it, she said slowly, it wouldn't be enough. Not in 3 weeks. What about the timber? Eleanor frowned. What timber? The grove near the gulch. There's good cedar in there, mature trees, worth something to the right buyer. I can't cut down those trees. Thomas loved that grove. Thomas is gone, Eleanor, and you're about to lose everything he built if you don't do something. The words stung because they were true. Thomas was gone, had been gone for 4 years, and holding on to sentiment while the bank foreclosed wasn't honoring his memory, it was wasting it. I don't even know where to start, she admitted. I do. Caleb leaned forward. I've worked logging operations before. I can mark the trees, arrange the cut, find a buyer. If we move fast, we can have money in hand before the deadline. Eleanor looked at him. Why would you do that? Because I don't want you to lose this place. It's not your problem. Isn't it? He met her eyes. You took a chance on me when you didn't have to. Let me help you. Let me do this. She wanted to say no, wanted to maintain the fiction that she could handle everything herself. But she was tired. So tired. And the truth was, she couldn't do it alone. "All right," she said quietly. "All right." They started the next morning. Caleb walked Eleanor through the grove, explaining what he was looking for. Mature cedar, straight trunks, minimal rot. Trees that would fetch the best price while doing the least damage to the land. "We take these 6 here," he said, marking them with paint, "and these 4 over there. Leave the rest to seed the next generation." Eleanor watched him work. He moved through the timber with the confidence of someone who'd done this before, assessing, calculating, marking. She'd never seen this side of him, never realized how much he knew. "Where'd you learn all this?" she asked. "Wyoming. Worked a logging crew one summer when I was 19. Hated it at the time, but I picked up enough to be useful." They spent 3 days marking trees and clearing access paths. On the 4th day, Caleb drove into Billings to find a buyer. Eleanor waited at the ranch, anxious and restless, cleaning things that didn't need cleaning just to have something to do. He came back at sunset with a check for $6,000. Eleanor stared at it. "This is real?" "It's real. Buyer's sending a crew next week to do the cut. We'll have the money before your deadline." 6,000. Not 8, but close enough that if she sold a few head of cattle and scraped together what she had left in savings, she could make it work. For the first time in weeks, Eleanor felt like she could breathe. "Thank you," she said, her voice rough. Caleb shook his head. "Don't thank me. You would have figured it out." "No, I wouldn't have." She looked at him. "I was ready to give up, ready to sell and walk away. You're the one who saw another option." "We saw it together." Eleanor folded the check carefully and tucked it into her pocket. It felt like more than money. It felt like a reprieve. A second chance. "What now?" Caleb asked. "Now we keep working. Get this place in shape. Show the bank I'm not going anywhere." "And after that?" Eleanor considered the question. After. It was a word she'd stopped using somewhere along the way. After Thomas died. After the money ran out. After the town turned on her. After had always meant loss. But standing there with the check in her pocket and Caleb beside her, after felt different. It felt like possibility. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I guess we'll figure it out." The logging crew came a week later, 3 men with chainsaws and a flatbed truck. They worked efficiently, taking only what had been marked, hauling the timber away in 2 loads. By the time they finished, the grove looked different, thinner, but not destroyed, just changed. Eleanor walked through it that evening, running her hand along the bark of the trees that remained. She thought about Thomas, about the afternoons they'd spent here when they were younger, talking about dreams they'd never quite reached. "Sorry," she whispered to the empty air. "But I had to." The trees didn't answer, but somehow she thought he'd understand. She made the payment the next day, drove into town with a cashier's check, and walked into the bank with her head high. The teller, a young man who barely looked old enough to shave, processed it without comment. No congratulations. No acknowledgement. Just a receipt and a curt nod. Eleanor didn't care. She'd done it. The ranch was hers for another month. Another year if she could keep it together. Walking out of the bank, she ran into Marianne. They stopped, facing each other on the sidewalk. Marianne's expression was complicated. Surprise, maybe. Or something softer. "Heard you made your payment," Marianne said. "News travels fast." "It always does." Marianne shifted her weight. "How'd you manage it?" "Does it matter?" "I guess not." Marianne looked away, then back. "Look, Eleanor, I know we haven't been on good terms lately, and I know you think I was judging you. Maybe I was, but it wasn't about control. It was about worry. You're the last person from the old days. Losing you would feel like losing a piece of everything we built here." Eleanor's throat tightened. "You didn't lose me. I'm right here." "Are you? Because it feels like you're somewhere else now, somewhere I can't reach." "That's because I had to leave to survive. The place you're holding on to, it was killing me." Marianne's eyes glistened slightly. "I didn't see it that way." "I know, but it's the truth." Eleanor softened. "I'm not asking you to understand, just accept it. Accept that I'm different now, that my life doesn't look like yours, and that's okay." Marianne was quiet for a long time. Then she nodded. I can try. It wasn't forgiveness, wasn't even friendship. Not really. But it was a start. Eleanor walked back to her truck feeling lighter than she had in weeks. That night, Caleb didn't go back to the line shack. They didn't discuss it. Didn't make a big declaration. He just stayed, and Eleanor didn't ask him to leave. They sat on the porch as the stars came out, sharing a bottle of whiskey and watching the land settle into darkness. You did it, Caleb said. We did it. Still counts, Eleanor smiled. Yeah, it does. She leaned against him, and he wrapped an arm around her shoulders. It felt natural, easy, like they'd been doing it for years instead of weeks. What are you thinking? He asked. That I'm terrified. Of what? That this won't last. That I'll mess it up. That you'll realize you made a mistake and leave. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I'm terrified too. Of what? The same things. Eleanor turned to look at him. So what do we do? I don't know. Try anyway, I guess. That's a terrible plan. You got a better one? She thought about it, about all the reasons this could fail, all the ways it could fall apart, all the scars they both carried that made trust feel like a luxury they couldn't afford. But she also thought about the ranch, about how close she'd come to losing it, about the way Caleb had fought for her when she couldn't fight for herself. No, she said finally. I don't have a better plan. Then I guess we're doing this. I guess we are. He kissed her then, slow and deliberate, and Eleanor let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, terrified and trying was enough. Spring came early that year, and with it, a shift Eleanor hadn't expected. The work didn't get easier. It never would. Not on a ranch this size with resources this thin. But it felt different now. Shared weight was lighter weight, even when the load was backbreaking. Caleb rose before dawn, same as her, fed the cattle without being asked, fixed things before they broke instead of after. The rhythm they fell into wasn't smooth or perfect, but it worked. Most mornings, Eleanor woke to find him already in the kitchen, coffee brewing, the stove warming the cold house. She'd stand in the doorway for a moment before he noticed her, watching him move through the space like he belonged there. Because he did. Somehow, without either of them planning it, he'd stopped being a stranger and become something else entirely. You're staring, Caleb said one morning, not looking up from the eggs he was scrambling. Am I? You do it a lot. Eleanor walked over and poured herself coffee. Maybe I'm trying to figure you out. Any luck? Not yet. He smiled at that, the small crooked one that made her chest tighten. Let me know when you do. I'd like to know myself. They ate breakfast in comfortable silence, then headed out to the south pasture where the fence still needed reinforcing. The ground was soft from snowmelt, making the post holes easier to dig, but harder to keep stable. Eleanor worked the auger while Caleb set the posts, both of them falling into the kind of wordless coordination that only came from repetition. Around mid-morning, a truck pulled up the drive. Eleanor straightened, shading her eyes against the sun. Not Marianne's Ford, not Dale's truck either. This one was unfamiliar, newer, navy blue, with out-of-state plates. You expecting someone? Caleb asked. No. They walked back toward the house together. A man climbed out of the truck, late 30s, clean cut, wearing jeans and a button-down that looked too crisp for ranch work. He smiled when he saw them approach, extending a hand. Morning. I'm looking for Eleanor Vance. You found her, Eleanor said, shaking his hand warily. Great. Name's Marcus Webb. I'm with High Country Development. Mind if we talk for a few minutes? Eleanor's stomach tightened. Development company. That's right. We spoke with your bank about some potential opportunities in this area. I'm not interested. Marcus's smile didn't falter. I understand you recently brought your mortgage current. That's great. Really. But I'd still like to discuss some options that might benefit you long term. I said I'm not interested. Mrs. Vance, I get it. This is your home, your history. But the reality is, ranching at this scale isn't sustainable anymore. The market's changed. Costs have gone up. Unless you've got serious capital to invest in modernization, you're fighting a losing battle. Eleanor felt Caleb shift beside her, his presence solid and grounding. I've been fighting battles my whole life, she said evenly. I'm still here. For now. But how long can you keep it up? Another year? 2? Marcus pulled a folder from his truck. We're prepared to offer you significantly more than market value. Enough to buy a smaller place outright with money left over to live comfortably. No more struggling, no more stress. And what happens to the land? We develop it. Sustainable housing, most likely. Maybe some commercial space. This area is growing. People are looking for places to settle outside the cities. We'd be bringing jobs, economic growth. You'd be paving over everything that makes it worth living here in the first place, Eleanor interrupted. Marcus's smile tightened. Progress doesn't have to be the enemy, Mrs. Vance. It is when it destroys what was here first. They stood in tense silence. Marcus shifted tactics, his tone softening. Look, I'm not the villain here. I'm offering you a way out, a good way out. But if you refuse, someone else will sell eventually. And when they do, the development will happen anyway. At least this way, you benefit. Get off my property, Eleanor said quietly. Mrs. Vance, now. Marcus held her gaze for a long moment, then sighed and tucked the folder back into his truck. You've got my card, he said, placing it on the hood of Eleanor's truck. When you change your mind, call me. He drove away, leaving Eleanor and Caleb standing in the dusty drive. You all right? Caleb asked. They're not going to stop. Eleanor's voice was tight. The bank, the developers, all of them, they smell blood in the water. So we don't bleed. Easy to say, harder to do. Caleb picked up the business card Marcus had left, studied it for a moment, then tore it in half. Then we do it the hard way. Despite everything, Eleanor felt a smile tug at her mouth. You make it sound simple. It is simple. Not easy, but simple. We keep working, keep fighting, keep proving them wrong. Eleanor wanted to believe him, wanted to think sheer stubbornness could be enough. But doubt was a persistent thing, and it whispered in the quiet moments when she let her guard down. Still, watching Caleb walk back toward the fence line, tools slung over his shoulder, she thought maybe he was right. Maybe simple was all they needed. 2 weeks later, Eleanor got her first surprise. She was in town picking up feed when a man approached her in the parking lot. Older, weathered, with the kind of hands that came from decades of ranch work. Mrs. Vance? Eleanor turned. Yes? Name's Roy Chapman. I own the place about 20 miles north of yours, up near the state land. She knew the property. Big operation, well maintained. What can I do for you? Roy shifted his weight, looking almost uncomfortable. Heard you might be looking to lease out some grazing rights. That true? Eleanor blinked. Where'd you hear that? Young fellow who works for you mentioned it in passing at the feed store. Said you had good pasture going to waste. Caleb. He'd planted the seed without telling her. I hadn't really considered it, Eleanor said carefully. Well, consider it now. I've got more cattle than I've got land at the moment, and your south pasture would be perfect. I'm prepared to pay fair rates. 6 months renewable, if it works out. Eleanor's mind raced, calculating. Grazing leases wouldn't make her rich, but it would be steady income. Reliable. Exactly what the bank wanted to see. How much are we talking? She asked. Roy named a figure that made her throat tight. It wasn't huge, but it was enough to matter. I'd need to think about it, she said. Course. Take your time, but I'm serious about this. Your land's good, and I pay on time. Ask anyone. He handed her a card with his contact information and walked away, leaving Eleanor standing in the parking lot feeling like the ground had shifted beneath her feet. When she got back to the ranch, Caleb was in the barn repairing a stall door. She walked over and leaned against the frame. Roy Chapman stopped me in town today, she said. Caleb didn't look up. Yeah? Said you told him I had pasture to lease. Did I? You know you did. Eleanor's voice wasn't angry, just curious. Why didn't you tell me? Caleb set down his hammer. Because I didn't know if he'd bite. Didn't want to get your hopes up. And if I'd said no, then you'd say no. But I figured it was worth trying. He met her eyes. Was I wrong? Eleanor thought about it, about the way he'd quietly worked behind the scenes to create an opportunity she wouldn't have pursued herself. about the fact that he'd done it without expecting credit or thanks. "No," she said finally, "you weren't wrong." Over the next few days, more offers trickled in. A woman who wanted to stable her horses on Eleanor's property, a local outfitter interested in using the back trails for guided rides. Small things, individually. But together, they added up to something that looked almost like stability. Eleanor signed the grazing lease with Roy, shook hands with the woman about the horses, started conversations with the outfitter about logistics. And slowly, incrementally, the ranch started to feel less like a burden and more like a business again. It wasn't easy. The paperwork alone made her head spin, and there were days when coordinating everything felt harder than just doing the work herself. But Caleb was there, helping her organize, reminding her what she'd agreed to when her brain felt too full to remember. "You're good at this," she told him one evening as they reviewed contracts at the kitchen table. "At what?" "Running things, managing. You could do this for a living if you wanted." Caleb's expression went distant. "I've done it before." "Where?" He was quiet for a long moment. Eleanor waited, not pushing. "I had a ranch once," he said finally. "Small place in Wyoming. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. Ran it for about 5 years. Eleanor's breath caught. "What happened?" "I lost it. Bad drought, worse decisions. Took on debt I couldn't repay, made promises I couldn't keep. Lost the land, lost everything else in the process." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. It was my fault. I was young and stupid and thought I could muscle through anything." He looked at her. "That's why I've been drifting. Couldn't face staying in one place. Couldn't handle the thought of failing again." Eleanor reached across the table and took his hand. "You're not failing here. Not yet. Not ever," she said firmly. "We're doing this together. That's different." Caleb squeezed her hand but didn't answer. Eleanor understood. Words were cheap. Only time would prove whether she was right. The first real test came in late April. A late freeze hit overnight, the kind that turned the ground hard and killed anything that had started to bloom. Eleanor woke to frost-covered windows and a sinking feeling in her gut. She dressed quickly and went outside to assess the damage. The garden was destroyed. Every seedling she'd planted blackened and wilted. The fruit trees had lost their early buds. Even some of the hardy plants looked rough. Caleb found her standing in the wreckage, her arms wrapped around herself. "It's not as bad as it looks," he said. "Isn't it? We can replant. Still have time before summer." "With what money?" "We'll figure it out." Eleanor wanted to scream, wanted to throw something, but what good would it do? The weather didn't care, the land didn't care. All she could do was adapt. "I'm so tired of figuring it out," she said quietly. Caleb put his arm around her shoulders. "I know." They stood there in silence, surveying the damage, and Eleanor felt the weight of it settle over her again. The constant struggle, the endless setbacks, the feeling that no matter how hard she worked, something would always come along to knock her back down. "Tell me this gets easier," she said. "It doesn't." Caleb's voice was honest. "But you get stronger, better at handling it." "What if I don't want to get stronger? What if I just want it to stop?" "Then we take a break, sit down, have coffee, breathe for a minute." Eleanor looked at him. "That's simple?" "That's simple." They went inside. Caleb made coffee while Eleanor sat at the table, staring at nothing. When he handed her a mug, she wrapped her hands around it and let the warmth seep into her fingers. "I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop," she admitted. "For you to wake up one morning and realize this isn't worth it, that I'm not worth it." Caleb sat down across from her. "You think that's going to happen?" "I don't know. Maybe." "Well, it's not." His voice was matter-of-fact. "I'm not going anywhere, Eleanor. Not because everything's perfect, but because it's not. Because this, you, this place, this mess we're building together, it matters. And I'm done running from things that matter." Eleanor felt tears sting her eyes. She blinked them back, refusing to let them fall. "I don't know how to do this," she said. "Do what?" "Trust someone. Let them in. Believe they'll stay." "Neither do I, but we're doing it anyway." She laughed, wet and shaky. "We're a real pair." "Yeah, we are." They sat in silence, drinking coffee, and Eleanor felt something shift inside her. Not the fear disappearing. That was still there, sharp and persistent. But something else growing alongside it. Something that felt almost like hope to Sora. By May, the ranch had transformed in ways Eleanor hadn't thought possible. The fences were solid, the barn was weatherproof. The pastures had livestock grazing on them for the first time in years, Roy's cattle and the horses Eleanor was boarding. The outfitter had started bringing groups through on weekend trail rides, paying her a percentage of their fees. It wasn't prosperity, not even close, but it was survival that didn't feel like drowning. The town had started to shift too, though Eleanor couldn't pinpoint exactly when. Maybe it was seeing the ranch come back to life. Maybe it was the fact that she and Caleb kept showing up, kept working, kept refusing to disappear like everyone expected. Donna at the diner started making eye contact again. The mechanic had an opening when Eleanor needed her truck serviced. Small things, but they mattered. One Saturday morning, Eleanor was in the feed store when Marianne walked in. They'd seen each other in passing over the past few weeks, but hadn't really talked. This time, Marianne walked over deliberately. "Eleanor?" "Marianne." They stood there awkwardly for a moment. Then Marianne said, "Place looks good. The ranch?" "Thank you. Heard you're leasing pasture now, boarding horses." "I am." Marianne nodded slowly. "That's smart. Diversifying. Thomas would have liked that." The mention of Thomas caught Eleanor off guard. Marianne almost never talked about him. "I hope so," Eleanor said quietly. "He would have liked Caleb too, I think. The way he works. The way he looks after things." Marianne paused. "The way he looks after you." Eleanor didn't know what to say to that. "I was wrong," Marianne continued, "about a lot of things. I thought you were making a mistake. Thought you were going to get hurt. But you're tougher than I gave you credit for." "I'm not tough. I'm just stubborn." "Same thing, sometimes." Marianne's expression softened. "I'm glad you didn't listen to me." Eleanor felt her throat tighten. "Me too." They didn't hug, didn't make grand declarations of renewed friendship. But something had mended between them, fragile and tentative, and that was enough. That evening, Eleanor told Caleb about the conversation. "Marianne apologized," she said, still sounding surprised. "That's good." "Is it? I mean, she was awful. For weeks." "People are allowed to change their minds." Caleb glanced at her. "We did." Eleanor thought about that, about the way she'd been so determined to stay alone, to keep everyone at arm's length, about how Caleb had come into her life uninvited and unwanted, and she'd fought against it until she couldn't anymore. "Yeah," she said. "I guess we did." They were sitting on the porch, watching the sun set over the hills. The air smelled like grass and wood smoke. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed. "You ever think about the future?" Eleanor asked. "Sometimes." "Why?" "What do you see?" Caleb was quiet for a moment. "Honestly, I try not to look too far ahead. Makes me nervous. But if you did," hypothetically, he turned to look at her. "I see this. You, me, the ranch, getting through each season, making it work." "That's it? Isn't that enough?" Eleanor considered. A year ago, she would have said no, would have thought a future that small wasn't worth fighting for. But now, sitting beside him in the fading light, it felt like everything. "Yeah," she said. "It is." The first serious conflict came in early June. Roy Chapman stopped by unannounced, his face troubled. Eleanor met him in the yard, Caleb emerging from the barn a moment later. "Roy, everything all right?" "Not exactly." Roy pulled off his hat, turning it in his hands. "I got a call this morning. Development company's been reaching out to landowners in the area, offering buyouts." Eleanor's stomach sank. "High Country Development?" "That's the one. They called me last week, just got off the phone with Dale Pritchard. They called him too. And Marianne." "What did you tell them?" "Told them to go to hell, same as you did. But that's not what worries me." Roy's expression was grim. "They got to Pete Alvarez. He's selling 1,200 acres on the east side of the valley." The news hit like a punch. Pete's land bordered 3 other properties, including Roy's. If development started there, it would spread. "When?" Eleanor asked. Papers are signed. Crews start clearing in 2 months. Caleb stepped forward. What kind of development? Mixed use, some residential, some commercial. They're planning a whole complex, houses, shops, maybe a hotel. Roy shook his head. It's going to change everything. Traffic, noise, water usage, the whole character of this area. Eleanor felt something cold settle in her chest. Can we stop it? Not legally. Pete owns his land. He can sell it if he wants. But we can make noise. File complaints about environmental impact, water rights, zoning. Slow them down, at least. And if that doesn't work? Roy's silence was answer enough. After he left, Eleanor stood in the yard staring at the horizon. She could almost see it. The future Roy had described. Houses creeping across the valley. Strip malls replacing pastures. The quiet, open space she'd fought so hard to keep becoming just another suburb. Talk to me, Caleb said quietly. I don't know what to say. We finally get things stable, and now this. It's not your fault. I know. But it feels like it doesn't matter what I do, how hard I work. Something's always there, waiting to take it all away. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, So we fight. Against a development company? They have lawyers, money, political connections. And we have this. He gestured at the land. We have roots. We have people who care about keeping things the way they are. That's worth something. Eleanor wanted to believe him, but she'd seen this story before. Small ranchers against big money. It never ended well for the ranchers. What if we lose? She asked. Then we lose, but at least we tried. It wasn't reassuring, but it was honest, and maybe that was all she needed to hear. Masit. Over the next 2 weeks, Eleanor threw herself into organizing resistance. She called Marianne, Roy, Dale, and anyone else who might have a stake in stopping the development. They met at her ranch. 12 ranchers and landowners crowded into her living room, drinking coffee and arguing strategy. We need to hit them on environmental grounds, Dale said. Water rights, runoff, wildlife habitat. That'll slow them down, but it won't stop them, Marianne countered. We need political pressure. Get the county commissioners involved. Half the commissioners are in the development company's pocket, Roy said flatly. The conversation went in circles, everyone frustrated, nobody with a clear answer. Eleanor listened, feeling the weight of it press down on her shoulders. Finally, Caleb spoke up. He'd been quiet until then, standing in the corner, just observing. What if we offer an alternative vote? He said. Everyone turned to look at him. What kind of alternative? Dale asked. Conservation easement. We band together, put our land into protected status. Can't be developed, can't be subdivided. Keeps it open space permanently. That limits what we can do with our own property, someone pointed out. It does, but it also protects it, and it sends a message. This land isn't for sale. The room fell silent as people considered. Eleanor looked at Caleb, seeing him in a new light. This wasn't just a drifter fixing fences. This was someone who understood land, legacy, and what it meant to fight for something bigger than yourself. It's worth looking into, Marianne said slowly. If enough of us commit, it could work. Big if, Dale muttered. True, but it's an option. Roy looked at Eleanor. What do you think? Eleanor thought about Thomas, about the years she'd spent trying to hold on to this place, about the future she'd started to imagine, not just for herself, but for the land itself. I think it's worth trying, she said. The meeting broke up with cautious optimism. People left with assignments, researched the legal requirements, talked to conservation groups, sound out other landowners. It wasn't a solution yet, but it was a direction. After everyone had gone, Eleanor and Caleb cleaned up the living room in silence. When the dishes were done and the furniture back in place, they stood together in the kitchen. That was a good idea, Eleanor said. The conservation easement. Might not work, but it might. And that's more than we had this morning. Caleb leaned against the counter, looking tired. I keep thinking about my old place, how I lost it because I was too proud to ask for help, too stubborn to see there were other ways to save it. This is different. Is it? Or am I just making the same mistakes with your land instead of mine? Eleanor walked over and put her hands on his face, making him look at her. You're not making mistakes. You're fighting. There's a difference. What if I can't save this either? Then we lose together. But Caleb, you're not alone in this. That's what makes it different. He pulled her close, and they stood there in the quiet kitchen, holding on to each other like it was the only thing keeping them upright. And maybe it was. The conservation easement took 3 months to organize, and it nearly fell apart twice. The first time was when Jim Holloway backed out, spooked by the restrictions it would put on his land. The second was when the county commissioners tried to block it, citing technicalities that everyone knew were really about protecting the development company's interests. But each time, the coalition rallied. Eleanor spent hours on the phone, in meetings, at kitchen tables across the valley, convincing people that this mattered, that what they were protecting was worth more than what they'd be giving up. Caleb was beside her through all of it. He drove her to meetings when she was too exhausted to be behind the wheel, reminded her to eat when she forgot, stood beside her when she had to argue with lawyers who talked down to her like she was stupid. You don't have to do this, she told him one night in late August. They were sitting on the porch, both of them bone-tired, reviewing documents by lamplight. Do what? Any of this. Fight my battles. Put yourself through this mess. Caleb set down the papers he'd been reading. These aren't just your battles anymore. Aren't they? This is my land, my fight. It's our land now, or it could be if you wanted. He said it casually, but Eleanor heard the weight beneath it. She looked at him. What are you saying? I'm saying I'm not going anywhere. I'm saying this place feels more like home than anywhere I've been in 10 years. I'm saying... He paused, searching for words. I'm saying if you want me here permanently, I'm here. Eleanor's heart stuttered. Permanently. Yeah. You mean like whatever you want it to mean. Partner, co-owner, husband if you're interested. He met her eyes. I know it's complicated. I know people will talk, but I don't care anymore. I just care about you. Eleanor felt tears burn behind her eyes. I'm 58 years old. I know. I'm difficult, stubborn. I don't know how to share space or make compromises or any of the things people are supposed to do in a relationship. Neither do I. Then why would we do this? Caleb smiled that crooked smile she'd come to love. Because we're doing it anyway. Have been for months. Might as well make it official. Eleanor laughed, shaky and wet. That's the worst proposal I've ever heard. Probably, but it's honest. He reached for her hand. So what do you say? She thought about Thomas, about the years she'd spent being his wife, then his widow, about the identity she'd built around being alone, being strong, being the woman who didn't need anyone. And then she thought about Caleb, about the way he'd shown up and refused to leave, about the fence he'd fixed without asking, about the way he'd fought for her ranch like it was his own, because now, in all the ways that mattered, it was. Yes, she said. Yes, I want you here, permanently. He kissed her then, gentle and sure, and Eleanor felt something settle in her chest. Not happiness exactly. That seemed too simple for what this was, but rightness. The sense that after years of fighting currents, she'd finally found solid ground. They didn't get married right away. There was too much else happening, and neither of them cared much about ceremonies. But Eleanor added Caleb's name to the ranch documents, made him a legal partner, gave him the thing he'd lost in Wyoming, a place to belong that wouldn't disappear if he made a mistake. You sure about this? He asked when they signed the papers. Are you? I asked first. Eleanor looked at him. I'm terrified, but I'm sure. Same. They shook hands like business partners, then laughed at the absurdity of it. The lawyer who'd drawn up the papers looked confused, but Eleanor didn't care. Let him be confused. This was theirs, and it didn't need to make sense to anyone else. No. The real turning point came in September at the county commissioners' meeting. The room was packed. Ranchers and landowners on one side, development company representatives and their lawyers on the other. Eleanor sat in the front row, Caleb beside her, Marianne and Roy behind them. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Marcus Webb was there, looking polished and confident. He presented the development company's case with charts and projections, talking about economic growth and job creation and modernization. It all sounded reasonable if you didn't think too hard about what would be lost. When it was Eleanor's turn to speak, she walked to the podium with hands that shook slightly. She'd prepared notes, but looking out at the crowd, she set them aside. "My name is Eleanor Vance," she began. "Some of you know me. Some of you have decided you don't want to. That's fine. I'm not here to make friends. I'm here to ask you to think about what we're trading away." She talked about the land, about the generations who'd worked it, the lives it had supported, the ecosystem it maintained. She talked about water rights and wildlife corridors, and the fact that once you paved over something, you couldn't get it back. "This isn't about being against progress," she said. "It's about choosing what kind of progress we want. We can develop every inch of this valley, turn it into another sprawling suburb, and maybe that brings jobs and tax revenue. Or we can protect what makes this place worth living in and find ways to sustain our economy without destroying our heritage." She paused, looking at the commissioners. "We're offering you a choice. We've organized a conservation coalition, 8 landowners representing over 4,000 acres. We're ready to put that land into permanent protected status. No development, no subdivision, no loss of open space. In exchange, we're asking for tax incentives and support for agricultural operations that keep the land productive." Marcus stood immediately. "With all due respect, Commissioner, this is a stalling tactic. These landowners are trying to block legitimate economic development because they can't adapt to changing times." "No," Eleanor said sharply. "We're trying to prevent you from erasing those times entirely." The room erupted in argument. The commissioners called for order, and it took several minutes to restore quiet. In the end, they didn't make a decision. Tabled it for further study, which was politician speak for kicking the can down the road. But Eleanor saw something shift, saw doubt in faces that had been certain, saw people whispering, reconsidering. It wasn't victory, but it wasn't defeat either. Outside, Marianne pulled Eleanor aside. "That was good. Really good. It might not be enough." "Maybe not, but you gave them something to think about. That counts," Roy agreed. "We're not done yet, but we're still in the fight." Caleb was quiet on the drive home, his hand resting on Eleanor's knee. "You all right?" she asked. "Yeah, just thinking." "About?" "About how different you are from when I first got here. How strong." Eleanor snorted. "I'm not strong. I'm just too stubborn to quit." "That's what strong is." She thought about that. About the woman she'd been a year ago, isolated, brittle, half alive. About the woman she was now, still scared, still uncertain, but fighting anyway. "Maybe," she conceded, "but I didn't do it alone." Caleb squeezed her knee. "No, you didn't. The resolution came in October, and not the way Eleanor expected. The commissioners approved a modified version of the Conservation Coalition's proposal. Not everything they'd asked for, but enough. Tax incentives for agricultural operations, protected status for the core acreage, restrictions on development that would limit how much high country development could actually build. Pete Alvarez's sale still went through. They couldn't stop that. But the scope was reduced significantly. Instead of sprawling across 1,200 acres, the development was limited to 300 with strict environmental oversight. It wasn't perfect. Eleanor would have preferred no development at all. But it was compromise, and compromise meant both sides had to give something up. The day the decision came down, Eleanor stood in her kitchen reading the official notice, trying to process what it meant. "We did it," she said aloud, still not quite believing it. Caleb came in from the barn, saw her face, and stopped. "What happened?" She handed him the notice. He read it, his expression carefully neutral, then looked at her. "How do you feel?" "I don't know. Relieved? Exhausted? Like I want to cry and sleep for a week?" "All of that sounds right." Eleanor laughed, and then she was crying, messy, ungraceful tears that she didn't try to hide. Caleb pulled her close, and she buried her face in his chest, letting herself fall apart now that the fight was over. "I can't believe we actually did it," she said when she could speak again. "You did it. I just helped. We did it." She pulled back to look at him. "Together. Don't downplay that." He smiled. "Together." They told the others that evening, called Marianne and Roy, spread the word through the valley. There was celebration, but it was muted. Everyone was too tired for anything more than quiet relief. That night, Eleanor and Caleb sat on the porch with whiskey, watching the sun set over land that would stay open and wild. At least for now. At least for their lifetimes. "What now?" Caleb asked. "Now we live, we work, we keep this place running." "That's it? Isn't that enough?" He considered. "Yeah, it is." Eleanor leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his shoulder. "I never thought I'd get here. Never thought I'd have this. Someone to share the load, the land protected, a future that doesn't feel like drowning. You almost didn't. You were ready to sell when I showed up." "I know. Sometimes I think about that, about what would have happened if you'd ridden past instead of stopping. But I didn't." "No, you didn't." She turned to look at him. "Why did you stop, really?" Caleb was quiet for a long moment. "Because I was tired of running. And something about this place, about you, made me want to try staying. Even though it was hard? Especially because it was hard. Easy doesn't teach you anything." Eleanor smiled. "That's a depressing philosophy." "It's an honest one." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the light fade. Somewhere in the distance, cattle called to each other. The wind moved through the grass with a sound like breathing. "You think Thomas would approve?" Eleanor asked. "Of us? Of this?" "Does it matter? Maybe not, but I wonder sometimes." Caleb thought about it. "I think he'd want you to be happy and alive and fighting for something that matters. So yeah, I think he'd approve." Eleanor hoped he was right, liked to think that Thomas was somewhere watching, relieved that she'd finally stopped trying to survive alone. Winter came hard that year, but Eleanor was ready for it. She and Caleb worked through November, preparing the ranch for the cold months ahead. They reinforced the barn, stocked feed, made sure the equipment was winterized. The routine felt different now, less desperate, more methodical. The work of people who knew they'd be there come spring. The town had mostly come around. Not everyone. There were still folks who whispered, who disapproved, who thought Eleanor had lost her mind. But enough people had shifted that she no longer felt like a pariah. Donna at the diner smiled when she poured coffee. The mechanic made time when Eleanor needed him. Small victories, but they mattered. One evening in early December, Marianne stopped by unannounced. Eleanor let her in, surprised but not unwelcoming. "Coffee?" Eleanor offered. "Sure." They sat at the kitchen table, the same spot where they'd had so many difficult conversations. But this time felt different, easier. "I wanted to apologize," Marianne said, "properly, for the way I acted, the things I said." "You already did." "I know, but I've been thinking about it a lot, about why I was so angry, and I realized it wasn't about you at all. It was about me." Eleanor waited. "When you brought Caleb here, when you started living differently, it scared me," Marianne continued. "Because if you could change, could build a new life at 58, then what did that say about me? About the choices I'd made? I've been doing things the same way for 40 years, following all the rules, and I'm not happy. Seeing you break free made me face that." "So you tried to pull me back?" "Yeah, because if you failed, I could tell myself I was right. That the rules mattered, that playing it safe was the smart choice." Marianne's eyes were wet. "I'm sorry. You deserved better." Eleanor reached across the table and took her hand. "You're allowed to be scared. We all are. But I took it out on you. And now you're apologizing. So we move forward." Marianne squeezed her hand. "Thank you." They talked for another hour. Really talked. The way they used to before everything got complicated. About the ranch, about Caleb, about Marianne's own life and the changes she was considering. It felt like recovery, like finding something that had been lost. After Marianne left, Caleb came in from checking the cattle. "Everything all right?" he asked. "Yeah, better than all right, actually." She told him about the conversation, and he smiled. "Told you people could change their minds." "You were right. I hate that." "No, you don't." "No," Eleanor admitted. "I don't." Christmas came quietly. Eleanor and Caleb didn't do much. A small tree, a simple dinner, gifts that were practical rather than sentimental. But it was the first Christmas in years that Eleanor didn't spend alone, and that made it feel almost magical. They sat by the fire on Christmas Eve, Eleanor's head on Caleb's shoulder, watching snow fall outside the window. "You ever think about getting married for real?" Eleanor asked. "Like with a ceremony and everything?" "Sometimes. Do you?" "Maybe. Nothing big. Just us and a couple witnesses." "Marianne and Roy?" "Probably. You got anyone you'd want there?" Caleb was quiet. "No. Everyone I cared about is long gone or too far away to matter." Eleanor heard the loneliness in his voice and held him tighter. "Then it'll be small. Just the people who matter now." "That works for me." They got married in January in the living room of the ranch house, with Marianne and Roy as witnesses and a justice of the peace from Billings officiating. Eleanor wore a simple dress she'd bought in town. Caleb wore clean jeans and a white shirt. The ceremony took 10 minutes. Afterward, they had dinner, pot roast and potatoes, pie that Marianne had baked. It was unglamorous and perfect. When everyone left, Eleanor and Caleb stood in the kitchen cleaning up together, now legally husband and wife. "Feel different?" Caleb asked. "No. Should it?" "I don't know. I've never done this before." Eleanor smiled. "Me neither. Not like this, anyway." They finished the dishes and went to bed, and Eleanor lay awake for a while, listening to Caleb breathe beside her. She thought about the long road that had brought them here, the storms and struggles, the judgment and fear, the moments when she'd almost given up. She thought about Thomas, about the life they'd built together, and the grief that had nearly destroyed her when he died. And she thought about the future, uncertain and difficult, but no longer something to dread, something to build toward. She wasn't the same woman who'd stood in the storm a year ago, ready to surrender. She'd been broken down and rebuilt, piece by piece, into someone she barely recognized but was starting to like. Someone who fought, someone who hoped, someone who loved again, messy and imperfect as it was. Spring arrived in March, right on schedule. The land came alive, grass greening, wildflowers pushing through the soil, cattle calving in the south pasture. Eleanor and Caleb worked from sunup to sundown, but the work felt lighter now, manageable. The grazing leases had been renewed. The boarding operation was expanding, 3 more horses coming in April. The outfitter wanted to add weekday rides to his schedule. Small things, but they added up to stability Eleanor hadn't known in years. One morning in late April, Eleanor was fixing fence near the road when she heard a vehicle approach. She looked up, expecting maybe Marianne or Roy. It was Marcus Webb. Eleanor's stomach tightened, but she set down her tools and walked over. Caleb appeared from the barn, moving to stand beside her. Marcus climbed out, looking less polished than before. Tired, maybe. Or defeated. "Mr. Webb," Eleanor said evenly. "Mrs. Vance? Or is it Mrs. Rourke now?" "Either works," Marcus nodded. "Marcus, I wanted to stop by before I left the area. My company's pulling out. The restrictions the county put in place make the project financially unviable." Eleanor kept her expression neutral. "I'm sorry to hear that." "No, you're not." But he said it without heat. "I wanted to say you were right. Not about everything, but about enough. This place, it's worth protecting. I didn't see it before, but I do now." "What changed your mind?" "I've been coming up here for 6 months, really looking at it, instead of just seeing numbers on a page, and I realized what we'd be erasing." He paused. "Anyway, I just wanted to tell you that, and to say I respect what you did. It took guts." He extended his hand. Eleanor hesitated, then shook it. "Good luck," Marcus said. "I hope you make it work." "We will," Caleb said quietly. Marcus drove away, and Eleanor stood there watching the dust settle. "That was unexpected," she said. "People surprise you sometimes." "Yeah, they do." They went back to work, and by mid-afternoon the fence was repaired. Eleanor stood back, surveying the line of posts marching toward the horizon, and felt satisfaction that went bone deep. This was hers, theirs, protected and preserved and fought for. That evening, she and Caleb rode out to the high pasture, the one with the view that stretched for miles. They sat on their horses side by side, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "You ever regret it?" Eleanor asked. Staying here instead of moving on? Caleb was quiet for a moment. No, you? No. Even with everything that happened, the judgment, the fights, almost losing the ranch? Especially because of that. Eleanor looked at him. I was dead before you got here. Just going through motions. This past year, it's been the hardest of my life, but it's also been the most alive I've felt in a decade. Same. They sat in comfortable silence. Two people who'd found each other against all odds and built something worth keeping. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of sage and wildflowers. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried. The land stretched out around them, open and endless and theirs. Eleanor thought about the girl she'd been, full of dreams about what life would bring. She thought about the woman she'd become, Thomas's wife, then his widow, then something new entirely. She thought about survival and what it cost, about loneliness and what it took to overcome it, about the courage required to let someone in when every instinct said to keep them out. And she thought about Caleb, about the way he'd shown up unasked and stayed uninvited, about the patience he'd shown while she figured out how to trust again, about the partnership they'd built from nothing but stubbornness and hope. It wasn't a fairy tale. There was no magical transformation, no perfect ending. They were still two broken people trying to make a life together, still figuring out how to share space and make decisions and weather the storms that would inevitably come. But they were trying, and that was everything. Come on, Eleanor said, gathering her reins. Let's go home. They rode down from the high pasture as the sun set, two riders silhouetted against the fading light. The ranch house waited below, lights burning in the windows, warm and welcoming and alive. Eleanor had spent years fighting to survive, fighting the land, the weather, the loneliness, the constant grinding pressure of doing everything alone. But somewhere along the way, survival had turned into something else. It had turned into living. And that, Eleanor thought as they rode into the gathering darkness, was worth every battle she'd fought to get here. The land would always be hard. The work would always be brutal. The future would always be uncertain. But she wasn't facing it alone anymore. And that changed everything.